There we go.
As I was saying, I don't know if you caught this, Kevin, when you read the Santa Heist, but there's a Bianca Jones story in that, in which takes place on Christmas Eve, and she and Joe are, with the help of well, in the book it's an angel, but in the story in the Santa Heist, it's the Phoenix. They are protecting artifacts from ancient times, and one of them is supposedly from Saint Anne Lee, the patron saint of the graphic arts. Now put the ST together with the Anne Lee, and what do you have?
Stan Lee.
Yes. I have canonized Stan Lee.
Stan Lee.
That Marvel.
That's great. I'm sure
I
he'd
approve.
appreciate that.
Good choice for the patron saint for the graphic.
I wanted to get a saint in there, and the other saint mentioned was a very devout dog, and that's historically accurate. When people were actually worshiping a dog, well, honoring a dog as a saint, and when the church heard about that, they said, "We have to put limits on this."
But he's a good boy, very good boy.
He's the goodest of good boys. But yeah, by the way, for those who are wondering, Saint Roach, that's ROCH, is the patron saint of vampires.
Okay.
He's also patron saint of the sick and invalid.
Isn't there a DC city called Saint Roach? Hawkman and Hawkgirl used to work there.
I don't know.
It was the Hawkman series after the Hawkworld series, and something happened to Carter Hall, and it became the Hawkgirl or the Hawkwoman series for a while. But I think they were from Saint Roach.
Maybe, I don't know. To be completely honest, a long time ago, I made the realization that as a nerd, there's a lot of hobbies to spend my money on, and I can only divide it so many ways. And comics, sadly, were one of the ones I had to go. As much as I like this genre, there's too much to keep up with.
Yeah, and really, I think comics are our current myth makers.
Yeah.
If you look at it, they are the continue. Now, I will freely confess, I am not that big on Marvel comics. The only one I have I get now is Moon Knight, because he's frankly the scariest of them all. But I think he and Batman would get along really good. But you've got the Lost Son, who becomes a hero. You've got the Avenger who lurks in the darkness. You've got the Warrior Queen. You've got the Speedster, Hermes, Mercury, Barry Allen. You've got the winged. You've got the hawk-headed gods of Egypt. So we're basically, DC. I don't know. Like I said, I can't speak for Marvel, but DC is involved partly in retelling the old myths. And since we mentioned Neil Gaiman, I don't know if he still has the series, but he was doing a series of comics that retold the Norse myth.
Yeah, he has a book, Norse mythology,
where
he retells.
They're now telling. He's now retelling the stories as comic stories.
Oh, very cool.
And I think he goes beyond.
Package your work in more than one way. It is a good thing. Books, audiobooks, comic books. My 142nd Starborn stories. There's going to be a Kickstarter on the 25th of this month. There's going to be a card game based on them. So, whatever you can do, and Neil Gaiman can do whatever he wants because he's brilliant and he's got the pull.
Yeah.
He has a well-deserved fan base.
Yes. I mean, I don't read everything he's read. I haven't liked everything I've read, but there's no denying that he's one of our best storytellers, myth tellers. And again, let me say, if you have a chance to listen to the Sandman on Audible, do so.
The voice acting choices are so good.
They are. I mean, Neil Gaiman is the narrator. I think James McAvoy is Dream.
Hmm.
And,
I think so.
You can, given
David
that,
Tennant is Loki.
yeah, and the guy who played Wesley Crusher, I can't think of his name right now.
Oh, Will Wheaton.
Will Wheaton. Yep. He is essentially the narrator of the In at World's End.
Oh, nice.
So
I really have to catch up. I'm like halfway through the second one.
Yeah, but this one is it deals with the one in which Dream and Delirium go on an extended road trip to try to find their brother.
Yep.
And it also deals with the Orpheus legend.
Ooh.
And how that ties into the dreaming, and how it leads to what happens in that leads to the Kindly Ones and the Wake.
Mm-hmm.
And again, one of my favorite parts of the whole Sandman thing is where, in a dream that involves everybody who's alive, Clark Kent, or rather Superman, Batman, and John Jones are in this crowd. And Superman says, "Do you ever get the feeling that your whole life is made up and people are telling stories about you and that these stories change?" And Batman says, I've had that feeling. I've had those dreams." And John Jones goes, "No."
Well, specifically, the entire arc is Superman talks about having a dream where he had the head of an ant, and another reference that are both What If comics. And then he says, but the worst dream is the one where I'm an actor in a screwed up version of my own life.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you ever have that dream? Batman says, doesn't everybody? And then Martian Manhunter goes, I haven't.
Yeah.
The tragedy of that scene, because I had, back when I read the comics a couple decades ago, I had a book that was a behind the scenes to them. Is in the original way that it was drawn, it was intended that Clark was actually going to be, Superman would be dressed up as Clark Kent, but the Superman cape would be hanging out the back. Because what would Superman have nightmares about? Being dressed up as Clark Kent, but having something that gives him away as Superman. Sadly, DC would not allow that because they felt it was too disrespectful to the character. The other downside of this, because I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea and it fits logically, is if you had been able to see the entire panel, well, you would have seen the cape. You also have seen that in his dreams, Bruce Wayne doesn't look entirely human.
Yeah.
He's more of a demonic back.
His true self would be Batman, while Superman's true self would be Clark.
Right. There's a what was it? There was it didn't last long, but it was a series called Justice League of America, in which Batman was in charge, and he had a lot of other characters, and they went to this foreign country, and in order to get the people to trust them, most of the heroes unmasked to show their true face. And somebody points to Batman and says, why doesn't he unmask? And the answer was, that is his true face.
As is perfectly stated in Batman Begins, Bruce Wayne is the mask, Batman is the truth.
Yeah.
There's one episode in which he's being made to think he's crazy, and somebody's doing the voice inside his head or outside his head or whatever.
Yes,
and he's
inside
like, "How
his
did
head.
you know? In my head, I don't call myself Bruce."
Yeah.
from Batman Beyond.
One of the things I liked about Batman versus Superman, I know there's a lot of things not to like, but that the character of Batman Bruce Wayne, what had they had flipped it, Bruce Wayne was the person who wore Batman as a mask. He was more, I mean, he did more work as Bruce Wayne and only became Batman when he needed to.
Yeah.
There's also a funny short from Cracked on YouTube that you can find on YouTube, which posits the idea that literally everyone in Gotham knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman, but the reality is Wayne Industries creates a lot of jobs and brings a lot of money into the city. So they let Bruce have his delusion that he has the secret identity. They just let out a couple of harmless, crazy people to keep him busy while the cops deal with the actual crime.
Mm. But I mean, it's a fun idea, but it kind of goes against the mythology of Batman that there is, and basically we rely on myths. What's the old thing? We don't tell children fairy tales to let them know there are monsters. Children know there are monsters. What they need to know is that they can be defeated.
That's a really good point.
And Batman, there are monsters, whether it's in Gotham or in Baltimore or in Metropolis or in Denver or wherever. And Batman is the one, is that this mythical creature who fights the monsters for us. And Batman's monsters are, are monsters of chaos. Whereas Superman's monsters are the monsters created by science.
To some extent, arguably, some of Superman's villains are almost monsters of order. I mean, Lex is a monster, but he's not a creature of chaos. He likes the natural order. He just likes being in control of it.
Yeah, that's
same with Darkseid. He doesn't want to destroy the universe. He wants to rule it.
Right. That's you could argue that as science or modernity, where everything has to be ordered to the extent that no one has a choice. Look at Brainiac, even to the point of, well, Chemo is more of a Metal Men type of monster, but what's the big gorilla? I mean, the
Gorilla Grodd.
No, the really big gorilla.
Oh, Titano.
Titano, all these things in the Superman universe are created mostly from science gone wrong. Where the Batman fights the where things have things that have devolved into chaos.
Society gone wrong.
Society going wrong.
Yeah,
in a lot of cases. Yeah,
and they need better doors on Arkham Asylum.
Really. Which is as many problems as I certainly agree with the everyone knows Bruce Wayne is Batman theory goes. The one thing it explains very well is why Arkham has a revolving door.
Yeah. But really,
well, there was an equally funny one that was basically Batman's true villain was actually Alfred, who hires all of these actors to portray these different flamboyant villains, basically as kind of a therapy for Bruce Wayne, trying to get him to, eventually get over his parents' death and grow up.
Alfred was the Joker in that one.
There was a I forget what it was called, but maybe it was. I think it was called The Last Sherlock Holmes Story, in which the reason Sherlock Holmes could not catch Jack the Ripper was that Sherlock Holmes was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
I haven't heard of that one, but I can't say it surprises me. And thinking of the character of Sherlock Holmes, he has a certain moral flexibility in the stories
No,
that I'm
yeah,
not quite saying I could see him doing it, but I could almost see it.
he has. I don't think he has a moral flexibility. I think he has his own moral and ethical system where, like, he finds the killer, and he discovers that the killer did what he did for a very, very good reason. And it's sort of like, as long as the police don't arrest the wrong person, you're safe from me.
Yeah, you have a point there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think I use that in actually to Holmes' disadvantage in a story called A Pardonable Offense, which is in my book, The Last Redhead, in which Holmes finds him, basically recruits A.J. Raffles to burgle a safe. And it's told from Raffles' point of view, but so of course, something goes wrong, and the solution to the murder, Holmes solves it, but wishes he hadn't. Let's put it that way.
Hmm. Now, Sherlock Holmes was an early favorite because, funny enough, as much as I love it now, when I was young, I didn't particularly enjoy reading. And very young Encyclopedia Brown, and then a little later Sherlock Holmes are a big part of what turned that around.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes, again, he's one of those people. He's a mythic himself.
Oh yes,
he's the wise man that people come to, and they don't always like the answers they get, but he mostly has the answers.
Yeah.
And every time he thinks he has all the answers, someone like Irene Alder comes and shows him that he doesn't have all the answers. And really, she's turned into a myth
herself, even though she was a very minor character in
She
the
was
story.
a minor character in the first short story. She was never even mentioned again. And people have built this whole mythology around Irene Alder and how she and Holmes were lovers, and even to the point where she gave birth, and the person to whom she gave birth moved to New York and became a fat private detective.
And works with Archie Goodwin.
Yes.
Nice.
But and the same thing with Moriarty.
Yeah.
Well, again,
is
mentioned in two stories.
Two stories. Yes, two stories, and basically there are more. I don't know who's got more books written about him, Irene Alder, or about them, Irene Alder or Moriarty. But yes, he was a master criminal. He was Holmes's intellectual equal.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Well, let's put it this way. Pat and I deal with the true identity of Jack I deal with the true identity of Jack the Ripper and the final fate of James Moriarty. Maybe not the final fate, but the fate of James Moriarty in the second Abyss anthology, and the story's called Out of the Abyss. And then we again deal with Moriarty in Detectives of the Abyss.
Well, I think with both of those characters, we're so used to the characters having a villain, especially, I would say, the last few generations. He-Man had to have his Skeletor on cartoons. Even G.I. Joe had to have Cobra. Batman has to have the Joker. Superman has to have Lex Luthor. So when they were, doing more Sherlock Holmes stories as things were in public domain, he needed his arch nemesis. He needed a love interest.
Mm-hmm.
But since he really didn't, they had to work with what was there. So I think that's part of why those characters, there was part of the myth that needed to be filled, and they were there. and they were available, and they, although Star Trek, I believe, got in trouble for using Moriarty when he was still covered by copyright, and then they had to make
that's correct.
Yeah, they thought he was public domain, but he wasn't.
Yeah, and they both, Irene Alder and Moriarty, had the advantage of not getting killed in the story. Right? Yes, Moriarty went over the Reichenbach, fell into the Reichenbach Falls, but so did Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
So if Holmes could survive,
why can't Moriarty?
Why couldn't Moriarty? Who was it? John Gardner. In his the Return of Moriarty, and then later in the Revenge of Moriarty, basically solved this by it was just Holmes and Moriarty on the precipice. Moriarty says to Holmes, if we fight, it's very likely both of us will die. And Holmes indicates, well, that's perfectly okay with me. But Moriarty says, I will make you a deal. We will both go away for 3 years and not show our face. And then when we both go to London, perhaps things can be different. Return to London, perhaps things can be different. And so nobody went into the Reichenbach Falls.
It's an interesting take.
Yes, and then the whole book is about both books are about Moriarty's. The first one's about Moriarty's return, how he's got to put his organization back. He solves, of course, the problem of Jack the Ripper. The first one is much better than the second one.
One of my favorite takes on Moriarty and Holmes. Have you read The Study in Emerald?
No.
Neil Gaiman.
Yes. It is a alternative telling of A Study in Scarlet, set in a world where the nobility and royalty of England are fairly openly worshiping the great old ones. And throughout this...
You mean they don't?
Not as publicly.
Not openly.
I get letters from them all the time,
And it's about a detective and a former retired British military surgeon chasing a serial killer through London who's killing members of this cult worshiping the old ones. And I don't want to say too much because it spoils the fun of the story. Although there's also a lot of really cute side references and one-off, because it's done in like the style of Penny Dreadful. So there's a whole bunch of little advertisements peppered throughout it, like Dr. Vlad's immortality elixir, or Dr. Jekyll's spiritual. I forget the word for it, but basically spiritual enema.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Exactly.
And which is an excellent book, by the way. It's a history of swearing and curse words and all that. Starts in Roman times.
This is the wonderful series, about swear words on Netflix, starring Nicolas Cage.
Having read Holy Shit, I can never hear anybody use the word fascinating again. I know the origin of the word.
I do not.
I really can't say it on YouTube. They would get really mad. But since we're talking about Holmes and myths and how myths change, some years ago we've recently had two different versions of what if Sherlock Holmes lived in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One was good, and one was I managed to watch 20 minutes before I turned it off. I'll leave you to decide which one it was, but most of the actors in the good one had British accents.
Well, funny enough, apparently, despite what people would think, the two shows kind of developed on their own. They weren't. One was not a copy of the other.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
You know, you have somebody gets an idea and somebody gets. Look at calculus. You know, that's not a TV show. That's the actual mathematic thing. But you know, and to this day, ABC people will swear that despite having optioned fables from its creators, they came up with Once Upon a Time all by themselves.
We can let other people sort out the truth of that one.
Yeah.
Well, you had back in the 90s, you had Kevin Costner's Wyatt Earp and Tombstone both come out the same year and were developed pretty much parallel to each other without any, there wasn't any cross pollination. They just both two studios came up with the idea of doing the definitive Wyatt Earp movie.
And the pulp character, the Black Bat, by G. Wayman Jones, paralleled the Batman story. Despite the fact that, yes, a lot of the Batman stories were borrowed or inspired by shadow novels.
Yeah.
But when I started reading the early Black Bat stories, all right, you've got a crusading district attorney who is splashed by acid during a trial, and instead of getting a scarred face, he goes blind. An operation restores his sight and allows him to see in the dark. He dresses up as a bat. He has a souped-up car, a retired criminal as a butler, a laboratory in his home, and the police commissioner knows damn well who he is.
Nice.
So, I mean, I'm thinking, all right, who stole from who? And actually, DC and the Black Bat people supposedly had a meeting to talk about the legal issues, and the decision was the same as Holmes and Moriarty possibly on the precipice. Look, I can sue you, you can sue me, I could win, you could win, we could both lose. Let's just pretend we never heard of each other. Works for me,
There's actually a famous
Captain Marvel's not going to be so lucky.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So here's a question on a similar note. Everyone here has probably heard and seen of the movie The Blair Witch Project, yes?
Heard of it, yes.
Have you ever heard of The Last Broadcast?
No.
Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I have heard of it.
How about you, Patrick?
I don't think I've heard of it, although I've heard of things similar to that. I mean, Cloverfield was a similar thing, but I hadn't heard that specifically.
So, The Last Broadcast is a movie that came out, I want to say, about 10 years before The Blair Witch Project, about a group of amateur filmmakers who wander off into the woods in search of an urban legend. The urban legend in the case of The Last Broadcast being the Jersey Devil. And the story, they're not the same story by any means, but they're both found footage. There's very similar elements in a lot of ways, up until the point that they went to court over, did you steal our idea? And what they ultimately realized, because the creators of Blair Witch Project were able to bring out notes from when they were back in film school, that no, the Blair Witch people had this idea about the same time the Last Broadcast guys had this idea, and they both came up with fairly similar movies without ever realizing it.
Yes. I can give you a modern example that involves me. I have a book coming out from Bold Venture Press. It's called The Wages of Sin, and sin is spelled S-Y-N. And it's set in Harbor City shortly after the events of the Devil of Harbor City. Well, I like the character of Jericho Sin, and I've been trying to come up with more ideas in case The Wages of Sin is at least a moderate success, enough that the publisher will do another one. But I had this idea, and I wrote it down. I'm thinking, okay, this looks like it could be a good story. Well, I was reading a collection of Continental Op stories by Dashiell Hammett.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I can be compared to Dashiell Hammett, although not favorably. But I'm reading these Continental Op stories, and I'm going, damn you, Dashiell. He basically had the same idea that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it did not involve a blackbird, please. Pat knows that I've been thinking about stealing the whole blackbird thing for a different anthology. But
actually, now just because I know where John is sitting in his house, John could reach up and show you the stuff that dreams are made out of. Speaking of the
Really?
blackbird.
Nice.
It was delivered to my door one night late. There was a knock on my door. I opened the door, and there was this old sea captain who handed me a package, something wrapped in paper. Then he died. Of course, his body's in my backyard, but don't tell anybody. Anyway, this is what I unwrapped. A fat man watched my house for several days until a guy named Cairo came and lured him away. But, no, I'm not stealing from Dashiell.
I don't know. There's just all sorts. Sounds like the sort of story. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, Kevin got a phone call.
And I think the Private Eyes genre has become a mythology in and of itself.
Yes, it has.
Very much so.
And really, when you think about the Private Eyes were the modern Western, the modern version of the Western, and
which is very much a mythology.
And that has its own mythology. And who were the cowboy heroes of the movies and TV? Well, Richard Boone nailed it when he called his character Paladin. They are the knights of Arthur's time who set about righting wrongs, when in a lawless land.
Yeah.
So one myth, doesn't die, but one myth fades into another myth, which then becomes yet another myth, and now one of these days we won't, somebody will come up with a new take on the Western, and then everybody will start doing modern Westerns, and the myth will continue. Or let's face it, the myth has continued. It's called Star Wars.
Dark Tower, no small part too, is definitely a modern take on a Western.
Where you have basically you have Star Wars. You have the wise old man. You have a magic sword, or in this case, several of them. You have the orphan who is not aware of his parentage.
Mm.
You have the beautiful princess who needs saving. Or no, she doesn't need saving. She just needed, to be let out of the house. And then but
saved her own self. It's one of the reasons I always liked Star Wars.
And you have the Tin Man. You have the equivalent of Perseus's golden owl. You have, so, and then if you've watched The Mandalorian and the book of
Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Put them in buckskin and give them horses and call them cowboys.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to point out two cultures having the same myth with different extrapolations. In Japan, instead of cowboys, you have samurai. And one of my favorite Westerns is The Magnificent Seven, which is based on 7 samurai.
Yeah.
which is also in itself a very good movie.
And the Seven Samurai were based on America's cowboy myths. So everything's a circle.
Yeah.
And for that matter, samurai movies also had a huge influence on Star Wars.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, so it's all it all comes together.
Yeah, Red Harvest inspired Jimbo, which then in turn inspired the Clint Eastwood, Sergio
Right,
Leone
right.
spaghetti western.
Red Heart.
Yeah, sure.
And it also, there was a Nancy Collins, Sonia Blue
Yes.
novel that was heavily inspired by Red Harvest and the spaghetti westerns.
And in the Japanese, both in the manga, which became movies, Lone Wolf and Cub had some serious influence on The Mandalorian.
Yes.
Yes.
It's pretty much that story.
It is. You know, it's that story exactly, which is, and I mean, it's been done before, but it's done very well in the case of The Mandalorian and Lone Wolf and Cub, actually.
So I'm sure somebody's done this. I don't feel like doing the, but can we go back far enough to where we can find like the original of some of these stories and myths? Like, I know when I was writing, well, Pat and I were writing Frankenstein Monsters of the Abyss, I looked into some of the origins of fairy tales so I wouldn't be repeating them. I wouldn't be basically having them told before they were actually written.
Yeah.
I may have cheated once or twice, but what the hell? It's a story.
Well,
and I think with the zombie, you know, mentioning that it comes from the Caribbean, actually, if you go back far, 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 and I only know this because of Hell's Detective, he sent into the underworld to calm down the goddess who becomes his wife later on, because she has raised all the dead because she's pissed at the other gods, and she has sent the living dead rising up and going back and causing chaos on Earth, which would have been the first zombie apocalypse in several thousand BC.
You know, so I'm sure there are stories, you know, that maybe we haven't heard back in the Greek and Roman time. Well, the Greek times, Roman, just as I said, the Romans just stole from the Greeks.
Mostly, they did come up with a few of their own,
but
and they stole from everybody else.
Yeah. Well, that's what they did. They found a god they liked. They said, "Oh, he's just another version of this one." And
the thing to realize, because I think this is important to point out, the Romans get a lot of flack for doing that. The Christians get a lot of flack for doing that. Everybody does that.
Yeah, we do.
All through history.
Well, I always like the story of from the Acts of the Apostles, where I think it's the Acts of the Apostles, where Paul is addressing the Romans, and he comes because the Romans did not want to offend any gods, so they put up a temple to the unknown God. And Paul basically says, "You have a temple of the unknown God. Let me tell you who he is." And then he proceeds to talk about Christ. You know, so it's one, like I said, one myth leads into another, and you know, the earliest myths were probably they hear thunder and see light. Somebody hears thunder and lightning, and they think that there's some greater creature causing it.
Yeah, well, most early mythology is an attempt to explain why things are the way they are.
There is, I can't think of it now. I actually got it on, I got it as an ebook, which means I can't reach up on the shelves and grab it. But it is a history of Mesopotamia and those areas, and it starts with the earliest city, and basically gives the name of the first known god.
Really?
where all that led. I'll see if I can find it, and
Please do. I'm fascinated.
I'll let Kevin know. And yes, Pat Negro is mentioned somewhere along the line. But it's it's kind of like, oh crap.
This makes me think of something interesting. Let me look this up.
The name of God.
Bob. I don't know.
Actually, it's revealed in the DC miniseries, The Flintstones.
I'm curious. Have any of you ever heard of the Paraha people?
No.
They're the ones that laugh at the piranha, right?
What?
Thank you, Pat. I wasn't going to go there.
Close. They are actually a South American tribe.
Woo-hoo!
Brian, have you ever heard of them?
No.
No.
So the Paraha people are very interesting. They live in South America. They're not a very big tribal group, but a Christian missionary went down to live with them and tried to convert them to Christianity. He found something really, really strange. And as far as we know, they may be the only tribal group like this, where when he first started telling them about his religion, they were really interested. Until they found out that he had never seen Jesus or the Father. And it turns out the Braha people pretty much don't believe in anything they haven't seen. And if they can't see you, you don't exist. So to them, for example, death is not a big, when somebody dies, they're gone. Why are you still talking about them? This missionary was kind of annoyed because his mother had just died when he had gone down there, and one of them was absolutely baffled why he was still upset. She's gone. It's over. What are you worried about?
So they didn't like the missionary's position.
What's interesting is I first heard about these people and started looking into them because a lot of YouTubers say they are the one atheist tribe. And it's not actually true, which is where this gets even more interesting to me. Because while they don't believe in gods necessarily in the sense the rest of us do, they do believe in spirits. And they also particularly have these there's an instance, this missionary who actually deconverted from Christianity to atheism from dealing with these people who had no concept of a god as he understood it. But he'd talk to them. They'd be standing in the woods looking at a beach. And all the people in the tribe would talk about this man they saw standing on the beach. But the missionary couldn't see him. And it's like, I would love to learn more about. I'd love to go down there and talk to these people and learn more about their culture.
It's the original show me state.
Yeah. Because we're talking, they're not a technologically advanced people. These are, I loathe the use of the word, but for lack of a better word for it, a primitive tribal group who have such a different idea.
Maybe prehistory tribal group.
I think that's a much better word for it.
Pre-industrial, yeah, or something.
Yeah. Has anybody, talking about gods and this, has anybody seen, I'm sure you have seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, that is something we're talking about. You have this tribe or this group of people, and suddenly something unknown to them falls out of the sky. So in their experience, the only way of something could fall out of the sky is if it was a gift from the gods.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they realize this gift is causing more trouble than it's worth. And since the gods aren't sending any more, it's time to give it back to the gods. And it's how this one person holds on to his belief system despite everything else he sees.
This makes me think
the
of
ending is simply remarkable because you don't really see it coming.
I've seen it, but it's been a very long time, probably close to when it first came out.
Do not do not see the gods must still be crazy or something like that.
Yeah, there is a sequel.
It's like most sequels. It's not worth watching.
Like, no, you said what you needed to say in the first movie. You didn't need to rehash. I was going to say, it just reminds me of the real world equivalent of that, which would be the cargo cults.
Right.
Which is such a, again, culturally fascinating concept for listeners who may not be aware. During the Second World War, the U.S. and other, but most of the U.S. would set up these temporary air bases on islands. And they would drop supplies. And the natives were awed and amazed by this. So they, years later, after the bases had moved on and the equipment had moved on and they stopped dropping supplies, people came back and they would find natives who had set up primitive, pre-industrial runways and were making the gestures like air traffic controllers and having coconuts and things like that on their ears to resemble the headphones, like they were ritually trying to recreate the steps that the very real military forces were going through to summon back all the stuff that they had found so useful.
Okay. Now, the writer in me is envisioning some people whose belief in this is so great, they actually summon up something that will land on their island and do good things for them.
That would be a good idea for a story.
It could be horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a difference between Pat and me. I'm thinking good things. He's thinking of some tentacles.
Well, it depends. Well, the other option, see, the one that really popped into my head first was somebody with, good, bad, or selfish motives has a plane and decides he wants to be a god. Finds out about it, lands, gets the women, gets them to serve him, and he goes and he comes back and he brings, the equivalent of shiny beads each time, and he gets to be a god until he does.
Now, if you want to translate that to a science fiction setting, you have the equivalent of a cargo cult on this planet, and a spacefaring rogue lands on them, gives them stuff, and once again becomes mud.
I think Star Trek Voyager actually did a variation on that kind of idea. There was a Next Generation episode in which they discovered what they thought was a stable wormhole, but it turned out not to be stable. But these two Ferengi went flying into it and disappeared. So years later on Voyager stumbles upon a planet where the two Ferengi landed and have turned themselves into gods among this lesser developed people with
the laws of commerce and worship.
Yeah, the little technology that they had brought with them on their craft. Yeah, they set themselves up as gods to be worshipped, and
which of course
we're living it up.
Depressingly makes me think of what is by far my least favorite conspiracy theory: ancient astronauts.
Oh yeah.
Although
ancient aliens.
To say there is the one great counter to the ancient astronauts, or at least one aspect of ancient astronauts that I really enjoy. So everybody listening, and I'm sure all of you guys have heard of the Nazca lines. The lines out in the Peru desert that when you look at them from the air are monkeys and spiders and all these other amazing shapes. Although some idiot destroyed a whole bunch of them by being a dimwit recently, unfortunately. What a lot of people don't, people have argued that the reason you can only see them from the air is it was a sign for the UFOs as a place to land.
Or we have monkeys for sale.
What?
Or we have monkeys for sale.
Yeah. What I quite like that you don't see any of those books mentioned, partly because they never mention, and it's very telling, you'll hear them talk about Mesoamerican, Native American, Asian, African, Eastern European. You never hear them talk about Western European wonders. But there is pictographs that you can find in England that are also quite remarkable. The most famous of which is the white horse, which is the shape of a horse carved into the side of a mountain that you only really can see properly from a distance. There is also the Care Abyss Giant, which is by far my favorite pictographic being in all of the world. And is the ultimate question of if you really want to believe that these were signs to the UFO people to land, tell me what this is a sign up for, because it is the image of a absolutely huge male, and it is very clearly male. Because aside from the fact he's holding a large club, he is naked, anatomically correct, and a happy boy.
Interstellar brothel.
Yeah, you might have a point there. But yeah, he's the one they never talk about. He's also known as the Carapace Giant, or he's sometimes just called the Rude Man.
Now, see what they also never consider the idea that yes, there were ancient aliens that visited, and this is basically just like their drunken graffiti that they left on our planet and continued onward. Just kind of having a goof and then moved on.
Either that, or just because they look like a monkey or whatever to us, it could mean something completely different in the aliens culture.
This is true.
It could be, if you can see it from space, or on your approach to Earth, it could be the equivalent of turn around, go home. These people are crazy and dangerous.
Yep. Warning signs.
Yeah.
There's also, I think, the best version of Ancient Aliens I've ever seen. There's an old adventure for the original Ghostbusters role-playing game, Hot Rods of the Gods, in which you find that, yes, in the distant past, Earth was visited by highly advanced space aliens, whose personal aesthetic was of a 1950s era greaser with souped up spaceships that all resembled fast cars. Further, you find out
race for pig slips. No.
that these aliens directed two particular aspects of human culture. One was the creation of the pyramids. And why did they create the pyramids? It's a skateboard park. The other is nudging the creation of the great cities like New York. Why? Because it's a perfect place for intergalactic demolition derby.
Yeah. Getting back to, I mentioned the DC 12-issue miniseries Flintstones a couple times. This is it's the Flintstones, but it is an extremely subversive book, and it deals with like the early versions of a lot of things that we take. I mean, yeah, granted, there are elephant vacuum cleaners, but it deals with a lot of things that we take for granted, like what was there before marriage. Where did the
no.
I'm going to tell Marie on you.
23 years.
And
just remember, Michael suggested marriages.
Where did war come from? Where did the concept of God come from? And yes, it does deal with ancient astronauts, because that is where the Great Gazoo comes
in.
And the role of the Great Gazoo is not exactly how it's depicted in the Flintstones cartoon. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's of when DC was doing its Hanna-Barbera miniseries like the Jetsons or Snagglepuss or Rough and Ready. This was the first one, and it was the best one.
and I read it on John's recommendation. And he did mention the woolly mammoth elephant vacuum cleaner. They make that one of the most interesting characters in the miniseries.
Yes, I mean, it basically looks at the lives of these
Appliances.
I really hate to say this, gentlemen, but we're coming up on 2 hours.
Okay, well,
this is our 2-hour special.
yeah.
Yeah, which I'm not complaining about, but seems a little long for YouTube.
Well, basically part 1, part 2.
Yeah, which is already is, by the way. But at this
Okay.
rate, we're going to be into part 3.
Okay.
No problem.
And-
we can do it another
have
time.
to end the season on a cliffhanger and make everybody wait 6 or 7 months to see how it ends.
Well, actually, I was going to extend the invitation if you're available, and if not, it's cool to come back next week.
Okay.
Possibly, I have to just check.
Okay.
Let me know.
I'm free. We can either continue this or come up with a completely different topic.
Yeah. And John is free. I charge a small fee, but very reasonable.
I'll also extend an invite and see if we can't get Lilith, Laura, and Micah to come on as well, because I think that would be really cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
The more the merrier.
Before we go, I want to give you guys a chance to plug your work, because you always deserve that.
Okay, I'll start. Again, I'm John L. French, and my most current books are in paranormal investigation. It's Bianca Jones, The Last Monster. In crime, it is Matthew Grace in Mortal Sins. In cryptids, it is Chesapeake Bay, basically year 1 of the Chesapeake Bay sea serpent. In the future, look for The Wages of Sin. Look for the ruins of Caroline, and look for Detectives of the Abyss, written by myself and Patrick Thomas.
Where can they find them? Like website or?
You can, well, put it this way: Padwolf Publishing, they have their site. eSpec Books has its site. Old Venture Press has their site. I have search for John L. French on Amazon. To get to my Amazon page, but please do not just search for John L. French, or you'll get a lot of books about France or in French. Search for something like John L. French, Mortal Sins, and then my book will come up, and then you can click on my name to get to my Amazon page.
I'll also put a link to your Amazon page and to Patrick's Amazon page in the description.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's the least I can do.
For me, my website is patthomas.net and patricktfibs.com. You can get links there for the Amazon page. Again, I write the Murphy's Law fantasy humor series, the latest book of which is Mug Life. And it has over 20 books in that series. Dear Cthulhu, where people write in and ask the great old one for advice. There's 6 books in that series. The most recent of which is Cthulhu Explains It All, Mystic Investigators. Most recent is Mean Streets. Bikini Jones, the most recent and second is Bikini versus the Sea Monsters. Cryptid. For cryptids, it is Cryptid Fight Club. For holidays, it's Santa Heist from John French and I. From editing, it would be Staring into the Abyss. And there's a whole bunch. If you have younger kids, I have picture books, chapter books with the Ugaboos. I have a bunch of middle readers, and I have YA as well under the Patrick T. Phibbs name.
And to give Pat a plug, if you are trying to buy something for a 14-year-old who likes dark and creepy and really enjoyed the Netflix series Wednesday, Emotional Support Nightmare. Oh, and Pat, remember, when you mention your cryptid novel, the first rule of Cryptid Fight Club?
If you don't talk about Cryptid Fight Club.
Fight Club. I will also add my personal 2 cents that all three of these gentlemen are fantastic authors. I love your works. Um, I also would highly recommend everybody go out and buy their books because Brian is gracious enough to be my co-host. John and Patrick have been on the show many, many times. Um, you guys pretty much always show up when I ask. And if you love the show, go check out their stuff. You'll enjoy it. And all three of you have been so wonderful to me. You deserve the support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, I believe we've mentioned more than once, but you want to plug your most recent, like part of that collection?
Oh yeah, yeah. My most recent thing that I have out is it's a couple of essays in or articles in the Horror Addict's Guide to Life 2, which is currently available on Amazon and on their thehorroraddicts.net website. And it's a bunch of articles relating to folkloric vampires, different types. I created different categories that various